On this episode of the Coyote Leadership Podcast, I sit down with best-selling author Michael Sugrue to trace his journey from military service to law enforcement and a single critical call that changed everything. We unpack why trauma for first responders is often thousands of moments, not just one, reframing PTSD as a post-traumatic stress injury, and we discuss how leaders can break the silence, build trust, and take practical steps towards recovery and resilience. Tune in for a candid conversation about stigma, mental health, and what real support looks like in the first responder and high-stress professions. You can pick up a copy of Michael's book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Audible. I know it'll make an impact on you, just as it had on my life. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe or follow so we can stay engaged. Hey, Michael, thank you for joining me here on the Coyote Leadership Podcast. Been looking forward to having this conversation with you. I read your book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma, and I have to just give you, a warm greeting and a sincere thank you for opening up and writing that book, because it made a personal impact on me. So I just want to say thank you, and it's great seeing you and connecting with you as you get out and about and you share your story to this day. How are you doing, brother?
Good. No, and I appreciate you taking the time to read the book. I think it makes a huge difference in the conversation that we're going to have. But as you know, more importantly, the book it's affecting people's lives all over the world. And it's part of my mission, that mission of just smashing the stigma around mental health.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's a great honor to be able to help you amplify that voice and help you along your way on your mission in any way that I can. I kept the notes over my book. I went back and looked through my read on the book, and something that stood out to me was just something that you said in there was trauma for first responders isn't one moment. It's thousands of moments stacked on top of each other. And, I don't know. I never really thought of it that way. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I'm prior military and both civilian law enforcement. And what I think's important to understand is that the average civilian, so the average person who's not in the military, not in combat, and not a first responder, they may have one or two traumatic incidents in their entire lifetime. And a first responder, if you take the average career now, the retirement age has gone up. So you're talking, 20, 25, maybe 30 years on the job. And in a single day, you could actually respond to two, three, or even more traumatic incidents. And if you take that over the span of your career, literally you're talking about thousands of traumatic incidents. I've heard different numbers, there's different estimates. Some people say, 500 to 800. But I really think that, saying 1,000 or more than 1,000 is really a safe number. As many things, I think the real number is underreported. And, a traumatic incident can be a lot of different things. And if you take the typical calls that our firefighters, our dispatchers, our police officers deal with, you're talking about homicides, suicides, domestic violence, attacks, sexual assaults, even just natural sudden deaths. But all these things add up over time. And in my case, and I think in most people's case, it takes a toll very slowly. Before you know it, you've gone many years in your career and you've internalized everything, kind of trained yourself to distance yourself, not make it personal, detach yourself. And that works in the beginning. But eventually,
Yeah.
that method or that strategy, it's going to fail. And these traumatic incidents are going to catch up like they did in my case.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that message right there was pretty profound takeaway for me personally as a reader there, and also as a leader in law enforcement in the military community. Talking with the guys and getting out and engaging with them and processing my own events. That was a profound takeaway for me to look back and be like, you know what? you can't just shrug those things off and try and mask them. And so, it really helped me explore personally, and then throughout conversations with my team members and some of our colleagues in the local area, really unpack a little bit more of what processing trauma means, and really recognizing things. So, that was a key takeaway that I got. So I wanted to get your opinion and thoughts on that a little bit more. Um, for your foundational upbringing, this book was pretty special about also sharing a little bit of your whole life's journey, which was enlightening also. And so, as a former Air Force officer who then become a Walnut Creek police officer, you have a very broad and diverse background in multiple aspects of a military and law enforcement, civilian law enforcement community. So, can you share with us a little bit about some of your foundational upbringing through the Air Force and hidden patrolling once you got out of the Air Force?
Yeah, so my interest in law enforcement in the military started as a child. My grandfather was in the Air Corps in World War II. My stepfather, who came into my life very early on, he was in law enforcement. And from the age of 8 years old, I can remember that's where I knew this is what I wanted to do. And, my original plan was to go into federal law enforcement. And I know to do that, I needed some experience, I needed a college degree. And so I actually looked into the Air Force. I got a full scholarship through the ROTC program, graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice from California State University. And I went straight into security forces, which was my first choice. And that was in 1998. And my original plan was just to do the 4 years. That was the time that I owed for my scholarship, and to go into federal law enforcement. And while I was in, I actually got to work with a bunch of different federal agencies like most military members get to do. And I realized quickly that I actually wanted to be out on patrol in a black and white, responding to calls, just not stuck in an office, not doing in depth investigations at first, but really just being out there in the trenches and in the field. 9/11 happened, so I ended up staying in longer than anticipated. I did 6.5 years active duty Air Force, and then I transitioned into civilian law enforcement. And, there's quite a few big differences that I don't think maybe the general public realizes. I think most military members and most first responders might be aware of these, but like for me, security forces is such a diverse career field that when I started out, I was doing nuclear security out in the remote missile fields. And then
Yeah.
I transitioned at that same base at FE Warren, and I got to actually do the law enforcement mission as well as the WSA, the weapons storage area. And it's kind of funny because I loved it. Like I was, the lieutenant out working the night shift. I
Oh
loved
yeah.
driving the patrol cars with the light bars, and I was doing traffic stops all the time, running LiDAR on base, going to any and every call that I could. I had to remember the security mission as well, but my heart really was in the law enforcement mission. And
Yeah.
funny true story was I remember when I PCSed from FE Warren Air Force Base, my commander gave me a bronze 1408, which is the military traffic citation, with the words in big red letters stamped on it, denied. And I remember getting myself in trouble a few times because, really my job was to be out there leading and managing and, the big picture stuff, right? But I knew then that like I wanted to be out in the field. I wanted to be out in the trenches. So, I thoroughly did enjoy that time. But after leaving FE Warren Air Force Base, I went to Germany and I was actually doing a career broadening. I was in command and control, and I worked for USAFE headquarters in a skiff, underground. And that's when 9/11 happened. And so that was very eye opening.
Well, so
That's
you
where I
were
really
you
did get to
were
see.
you were stationed over there when 9/11 happened. Interesting.
I was,
Well,
yeah, I was
that must
working
have been
and I
strange.
remember it was. And in a few months after that, I actually got deployed to the Middle East from Ramstein Air Base in Germany. And, I loved being stationed in Europe, but I remember that the day when 9/11 happened, just the difference in security posture from that morning to later that afternoon. I remember just, going on base and up armored Humvees with everybody wearing full gear, helmets, flak
Yeah.
vests, and mounted machine guns. And it was just, I mean, extremely eye-opening, and not to mention the high terrorist threat being
Right.
overseas.
Yeah.
But I thoroughly enjoyed that time. I stayed as long as I could there. And then I got transitioned back to California, which is where I currently live. And I was the chief of security forces at the AMOG, the Air Mobility Operations Group. Now they have an entire wing, but that was a phenomenal assignment. And that's where I went to Raven School. I got to do GMAT missions or Global Mobility Assessment Team missions down in South America.
That's
And
so cool.
it was. And I'll tell you, my biggest regret sitting here today is getting completely out of the Air Force. I knew I
Uh,
was going to transition out, but I
yeah.
wish I would have stayed on the reserve side. I had many friends who were IMAs or reservists, and they would do both. They would do the civilian law enforcement, and on the weekends or in the summer, they would do their reserve time. And so
Yeah.
I really do miss my time in the military and the Air Force, but I think that experience really matured me and really gave
Mm,
me that foundation that I needed for civilian law enforcement. Because I think, civilian law enforcement, in California, you could be 21 years old and be a
yeah.
police officer. If you make it through
Just
everything, if
still
you
really
pass the
young.
backgrounds, well, you're young, you're very immature. And I can tell you right now that I was not ready at 21 to be a police officer in the San Francisco Bay Area. And by the time I did transition out in 2004, again, I'd seen the world, I'd done a lot of different things, I had deployments, and I had that foundation, that background to be successful. And that success started right away in the police academy. And I saw fellow, not just Air Force or security forces, but I had other veterans in the police academy. And for the most part, I think veterans excel more than most civilians because they have that foundation, they have that experience. But at the same time, you have to be adaptable and flexible and open minded because it is very night and day comparing military law enforcement and civilian law enforcement when it comes to not just the different laws, but also dealing with people, dealing with civilians. And I know there's civilians on base, but dealing completely with civilians, many of which don't like you or they want to hurt you or they want to kill you, is very
Yeah.
different than dealing with active duty military members and contractors. So
Yeah,
there
that's true.
definitely was a big adjustment period, going from the military to the civilian law enforcement. But again, I look back very fondly on my time in the Air Force.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you carry that with such pride as well. A lot of the posts and connections that you maintain, including ours, came through. I think your pride in your service, and thank you for your service, and continuing as a veteran to wear that with the badge of honor.
Absolutely.
So, so as you transitioned in, obviously there was some growing and some changing to occur. Can you take us through some of your your upbringing as a police officer? And I remember some of which you did, including you eventually become a sergeant in the leadership management role, and somewhere along the line you were also doing some undercover.
Yeah, so like most police officers, you have to go through the field training program once you graduate the police academy. So I finished that. And within a year and a half on solo patrol, so out there working primarily graveyard shift, being very proactive, focused on getting guns and drugs and bad people off the streets. But I knew then that my ultimate goal was to be undercover. And ironically enough, like I said, I first thought about going federal, and DEA was at the top of my mind. And I found out in the civilian side, we actually had a regional task force that worked for the state of California, the Department of Justice. And so early on, I made that foundation of just being very proactive, always focused on self-initiated stops, arrests, citations, cases. And so within a year and a half of doing that, I was actually selected to be a field training officer, which was pretty quick. And again, I look back on that, and I owe that to my military time, to my maturity. Most officers do not make field training officer within a year and a half, and that was really my first supervisory leadership role within the civilian law enforcement world. You're not leading your team, but you're directly responsible for that person that you're training. And you're expected to mentor them, to guide them, to teach them, to hold them accountable. And so, as much as I tried to get away from that management and leadership, I found myself back in it in a
Kept
smaller
calling you.
scale.
Kept
It
calling
did.
on you.
But I will tell you is, it's a lot easier to supervise one person at a time versus potentially hundreds at a
That's
time in
true.
the Air Force, or even more than that. So again, I enjoyed that. But again, focused on my goal of being undercover. I did that for a few years, and an opening came up on that state task force that I told you about. And so I put in for it. I got it. And that's really where like all my dreams were coming true. And I plan to stay
Dang.
in that assignment as long as I could. Typically, it's like a 4 or 5 year assignment. Sometimes you can extend it 6 or 7 years maximum. But my goal was to do that as long as I could. And 2 years
Yeah.
into it, I was really like on cruise control. I had informants, I was making major cases, doing very well, working all over the state of California, primarily in Contra Costa County, which is located in San Francisco Bay Area. But we had cases that we worked with federal agencies and cases that went throughout the state. And unfortunately, my boss, it turns out, he actually, and there was a 2020 on this, a 48 hours, there's a book on it, but
Wow.
he was our task force commander, and he was actually stealing our drugs that we seized legally, replacing them with fake dope, and then selling them on the side, in addition to running illegal brothels, doing interstate drug transfers. I mean, you name it. Like I could go on for hours about what happened, but tragically, that brought down the entire task force, and that put an
Dang.
abrupt end to my undercover career. So
So
instead of
you
doing it,
had to go back
five,
from
six,
there?
7 years, I had to go back to my agency. And
Dang.
imagine working these huge, high level drug cases, some like cartel cases. And now I'm back in the city of Walnut Creek, which is a nice upper scale city, um, relatively low crime rate, but still lots of crime there, lots of transient traffic and crime.
Yep.
But it was a huge disappointment. And that was my first also exposure to corruption. In the
Mm.
military
Yeah.
and my entire time in law enforcement up to that, I'd never been exposed to any kind of corruption. And so,
It stings when it's one of your own, doesn't it?
well, it does. And I hate to say the same because they say it so often, but they say that nobody hates a dirty cop more than a good cop. And 99% of cops are good. They're out there devoting their lives, putting their lives in danger every single day for complete strangers, doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
And there's a very, very small percentage, like it turns out my boss, that was involved in this criminal activity. And thank God at the time, the Department of Justice brought in an outside team to surveil us, do a wiretap, because they weren't sure who was involved. And thank God they did that because they were able to clear myself and all of the active agents that were working on the task force at that time, other than our boss. But it turns out there was some previous agents who had been assigned years earlier to that task force that were involved in this
Dang.
corruption. And so that not only decimated our task force, but actually throughout the entire state of California, there was 53 task force. Eventually, it went down to like 17, and then eventually they disbanded the whole Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement (B&E), which is basically the state version of the DEA. And so now I'm back at Walnut Creek, and I'm working investigations, handling like cold fraud cases, and just, I mean, lame,
It's like
boring cases
white
compared to
white
that other
collar
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just, it was not stuff I wanted to do, but good, bad, or indifferent. I had a lot of FaceTime with our administration, with our chief, with our management team, and an opening came up for sergeant. I decided to put in. I didn't think I would get selected, because our agency had the mindset that, hey, if there's something you want to do down the road, like make sure you're always putting in, you're learning the process, you're going through the interviews, you're preparing yourself. And so I didn't expect it because I was like the most junior guy that put in for sergeant, but I ended up getting selected. And in November of 2012, I was promoted to sergeant. So about 8 years on, I got promoted to sergeant. And now I'm back on the streets. I'm working the graveyard shift again because I'm bottom of the totem pole in seniority. and running teams on the street.
And so that's like right around the time where you were on call, close to around the time where you had the incident when you had just recently promoted to sergeant, right?
Yeah, so there was an incident that truly changed my life. I'm not going to go into huge detail
Yeah,
here.
no
I
problem.
talk about it in the
Yeah,
book, but I will go over it briefly. But so when I got promoted in November of 2012, I went through like an informal FTO process where I rode around with other sergeants. I kind of learned their techniques, how they ran lineup, how they ran the streets, how they did report approval, how they managed their teams. And I did that for like a month, and then I got cut loose on my own. And so fast forward to December 2012. Again, I'm on graveyard shift. I have my own team. And at that time, we worked 9:30 at night till 7:30 in the morning. And this particular shift was my Friday. So it was the day before, or sorry, the day after Christmas. It started on December 26, 2012 at 9:30 p.m. And it was going to end December 27th at 7:30 a.m. And so about 4 hours from going off duty, it was a very quiet shift, not much going on because of the holiday. A call comes out. Our dispatcher is extremely frantic, and she puts out that there is a woman inside a condo and there's a man armed with a knife inside. And so I got there as quick as I could. All the officers are going to the scene. I get there first. Thankfully, another officer shows up right behind me. And as soon as we get out of our car, we just hear these blood curdling screams coming from a distance. And we just start running towards the screams with our guns out as fast as we can. And eventually we get to this condominium. It's a condominium complex, 2-story attached condominiums all around. We find the unit. We notice eventually that there's a huge window that's shattered into the condominium. My partner and I make entry. We clear the downstairs. We get to the stairs to go upstairs, and we're confronted with a subject armed with a huge knife. The same knife that you've seen in the Michael Myers, the Halloween movies. And he is at the top of the stairs, just sweating profusely, looking like a zombie, staring straight through us. And all we know is that he's between us and this couple that's barricaded inside their bedroom. And we don't know if they're dead, dying, bleeding out, but we got to get to them as soon as we can. And eventually the male comes out with this knife, and we have our guns out. We're giving commands, drop the knife, drop the knife. No reaction. I don't remember any visible reaction whatsoever. No eyes blinking, no body movement, just staring straight through us. Well, eventually he takes that knife up over his head in the stabbing position, starts coming down the stairs at us. I shoot, other officers shoot. He's now at the bottom of the stairs, still holding that knife. At this point, I wasn't aware that I'd actually hit him with my firearm. Didn't see any obvious wounds at this point. And again, we're giving commands. And he starts coming back up with this huge knife, literally just a couple feet from where I was standing. I shoot, my partner shoots. He was killed instantly. There's no nice way to say it. I mean, his wounds were just absolutely devastating. And, thank God we got there when we did, because this guy had been stabbing through the bedroom door with this huge knife. And that poor couple was inside, physically barricading their bodies against the door, trying to prevent him
Jeez.
from coming in. And so I know today, even years later, that had we not gotten there when we did, they wouldn't be alive.
Yeah,
And so, unfortunately, we had to take his life, not only to save our own lives, but to save their lives. But that incident, I call it my tipping point. You brought
yeah,
up earlier about the thousands or hundreds of traumatic incidents. And at that point, I had had hundreds of traumatic
yeah,
incidents in my career. I never talked about them, never dealt with them. And so this incident was my breaking point. For whatever reason, I lost that feeling of invincibility that I always had my entire time in the military, my entire 8 years up to this point in civilian law enforcement. So over 14 and a half years of just absolute invincibility, undercover,
right.
doing SWAT style entries. I mean, just all these things. And literally in that moment, I lost that. And that forever changed me. It started a series of tragic events, a downward spiral. We
Yeah,
got sued immediately. There was a federal lawsuit that drug on for many years. Even though we saved this couple's lives, we still ended
Right.
up on trial in 2016.
That
During
was
this
alarming
time,
to hear
oh,
that
go ahead.
that trial and everything, the investigation and all those things had taken so long. I was actually really alarmed by the length of time that you had to go through that.
Yeah, because this incident, I wanted to forget about it, and I couldn't. I had to
Yeah.
remember every finite detail, and I had to relive this event every year because we would have a deposition involving one of us. We all had to be there, where we were in a
Jeez.
small conference room. The father of the man I killed was sitting directly across the table from me, just staring at me the whole time. They had like 4 or 5 attorneys with a video camera set up, just pointed right at our face. And we got grilled and interviewed on the record for literally 8 hours.
Yeah.
And just imagine something that you just want to forget, that you have to remember it. You can't forget anything. And during that
Jeez.
time, my marriage is falling apart. My health is starting to fail. My stepfather, my hero, the whole reason I became a law enforcement officer, gets diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer at 58 years old. Just everything in my life is falling apart. And it got to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. I was literally trying to get myself killed in the line of duty because I didn't want to be here anymore. And that's how bad it got.
And man, why do guys and gals that are in this profession, like you said, they see hundreds and hundreds of traumas. And, God forbid, hopefully they don't get to a tipping point like that as well. But, why do you think in this culture that a lot of first responders are reluctant to like seek help? And they bottle this all in sometimes.
Well, that's how we're trained. I remember, going through the entire police academy, and we had one small block on mental health, but it wasn't our mental health. It was on dealing with people on the street who were
Good
in
point.
crisis or were a danger to themselves, or what we call in California, 5150, which is after the Welfare Institutions Code, which is where somebody's either a danger to themselves, danger to others, or unable to care for themselves. And I don't remember hearing from a single seasoned officer or veteran the realities of the toll that this job's going to take, not only on your physical health, your mental health, your relationships with your significant other, your spouse, with your children. Didn't hear about any of that. It was never talked about. In fact, like the military, and I go back to my time in the military, we never talked about those things. I
Yeah.
was in the Air Force from 98 to 2004, and we are trained to be absolute invincible warriors. We're trained to be the only ones running towards the danger when everybody else is running away from it. And
Yeah.
so, I remember years into my career, we eventually had like peer support specialists, and there was a contracted therapist, and we had like training, but nobody believed in that stuff. Nobody used that stuff. Like the people on peer support were not cops. They had not been involved in like crazy traumatic incidents. They were just like the nice people. And many of them were just
Right.
doing it to get promoted, or, a good check the box on their resume for their next special assignment. And
Mm.
so, even though we had these things on paper, nobody was using them, including myself. I didn't believe in that stuff. And I didn't have any kind of established relationships outside of work with therapists or clinicians, again, because we don't do that. We don't need to talk about
Yeah.
this stuff. Again, we don't know these people. It doesn't bother me, doesn't affect me. We use gallows humor. I learned that day one
Right.
in the police academy. I learned it again in the FTO program, the field training program, that, we use humor to deflect the seriousness and the reality of how tragic all these incidents are. And
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where you get trained by the trainer, you start doing it, and eventually you're training other people and you're teaching them to do the same thing.
It's like a learned
And
behavior.
oh, absolutely. But the ironic thing is, what we need to have to be a learned behavior is just to have normal discussions when we need to about things that are bothering us. It doesn't have to be a big earth shattering event, but just to be able to have that trust and that confidence and camaraderie to just have these frank discussions when we need to. And so, I look back now, and it really blows my mind that I could count on all my other officers to have my back, to have my cover in any kind of on the job scenario, no matter
Right.
how dangerous it was. Active shooter situation, active
Hmm.
domestic violence, bar brawl, whatever the case. But I never trusted any of them enough or felt comfortable enough to where I could truly be myself and open up to them and share some of these things. Because I think had I been able to do that and had the culture allowed for that, I think I'd still be on the job today. I think things would be much different.
That's a
And
really
that's why I
strong statement.
advocate. Well, it's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. And I think things are getting better, but still there's so much more legway that needs to happen. I mean, and I think it's better with the newer, younger officers that are coming in. I think maybe many of them are raised in a way where it's more talked about, it's more open. They have family members who may have gone to a therapist or a counselor. But these seasoned veteran officers are still out there and they weren't trained that way. And they're still in that old mentality of just suck it up, don't talk about it,
Push,
don't share it.
push through.
That's weakness. Yeah, that's weakness. That's you can't be vulnerable. And it's not true. You can be the biggest, baddest warrior out there and still be vulnerable at the same time. And that's my message. When I go out there and speak all over the world, it's to show people that no, asking for help when you need to is one of the bravest and most courageous things that you could ever do in your entire life.
Absolutely. And it's a strength. It's not a weakness. And I think more people need to realize that. That how vulnerable do you have to be to come talk about the darkest thoughts in your mind and the darkest places that you're in? It's way easier to make a joke and deflect that than it is to actually open up and ask for help. So it is a challenge. It's tough.
It is, but the key to that, I'm going to tell you right now, and this goes
Yeah.
to any type of leader out there, any type of supervisor, which is pretty much anybody in the military or any first responder. Because if you've been on the job for 6 months, that's longer than the new people coming in, right? So you have seniority, you're expected to have leadership. But my point to that is you have to lead by example. And you lead by example by being vulnerable first yourself. There is no way you can expect people underneath you or subordinate to you to ever come to you when they need to and be open, honest, and vulnerable and transparent if they don't trust you. And the only way they're going to trust you is if they know that you get it, that you truly get it, that you've been there yourself, that you came out the other side. Because the reality is, we've all been there. We've all been through ups and downs. We've all faced adversity and hardship. And we've all experienced trauma. And so we need our leaders at all levels to step up and start that conversation instead of just expecting them to open up and spill the beans, but start that conversation by being open, vulnerable, and transparent yourself. That is
Yeah,
the key to this whole thing.
that's actually amazing. I kind of a practice that I use, and it has helped create some better connections. I think with the guys I've been charged to lead is the old open door policy. Oh well, my door was open. You could have come and told me any of this anytime. It doesn't work if you have a closed mind. So I like to have the open-minded policy. And I'll listen to people out. We don't always agree on things, and I may not be able to properly empathize or, understand you fully, but I'll listen and I'll care. And I think that's helped a lot of connections with the relationships that I've had in this profession. And hopefully, it was a good example to set for the folks that are coming up behind me and going to take the torch. It's hard because of that hardened mentality is, like you said, we're trained that way and it's kind of an expectation. And, there's time and place where you need to come and do those things, but it's a lot of times where that place could be the right place and the right time. If more people were more willing to embrace that, I think we could make a better change at smashing the stigma, like you like to say. I
Absolutely. And
think,
I've met some outstanding leaders out there, chiefs, high-ranking military officers who have started doing this and have led by example. I seen the culture within their agencies, within their organizations, it's night and day. I mean, you can tell the difference. You can tell when, it's not just something that people are trained on or they have these things available, but when, the troops see the higher ups actually living by it and doing it, and leading by that example, that's what makes the true difference. That's what creates this environment of trust. And trust is the key.
Absolutely. One of the other notes I took from the book, which was a good one for me and on point with this, I think it was actually in your partner Dr. Springer's response to one of the chapters. It said trust outranks rank. You know, and to me that was like a really good takeaway. I took a note on that one as well. So you know, you were coming through your tipping point, and you still had you know, a lot on your plate. What were some of the key things that really helped you get out? What made you get the courage to come open up and ask for help? How did you do it?
Unfortunately, it was another very tragic incident that actually pulled me out of the darkness, that literally saved my life. But it was after my trial had ended in 2016, so it ended September 2016. We were cleared. You know, the judge even said, had it not been for our actions, more lives would have been lost that day. You know, we did win that trial, we prevailed. And I thought magically, once that trial was over, like all my problems would magically go away. That's what I told myself during that 4-year period where literally my life was falling apart. But the trial actually made things much, much worse. You know, having to relive that again for 2 weeks, having to see, which I didn't mention before, but the guy that tried to kill me and my fellow officers had an identical twin brother who was actually on active duty in the Air Force when the shooting happened. And he actually was at the trial. And so for 2 weeks straight, I saw this same face, I mean, identical twin in the courtroom, literally sitting feet behind me every single day. And my nightmares started to increase. My risk taking behavior started to increase. And November, so shortly after that, I was on duty, getting ready to go home, working day shift, and a suicide in progress comes out at a residence in our city. And I didn't recognize the address right away, but it turns out it was my best friend, John Davison. And John Davison was a Vietnam veteran. He was an Army MP, but he was also a 35-year reserve officer with my department, and he had retired a couple years earlier. And you know, he had been going through some things personally. His relationship of decades ended. He didn't have children, but he lost both his dogs. Those were basically his kids. And I knew he was going through some difficult times, but I didn't know how bad it was. And instead of, you know, pushing the surface, I would just take that surface value answer of like, you know, check in with him. Are you doing okay? He would tell me he was doing fine, but I just knew deep down that it wasn't fine. And it, you know, he got to the point where he didn't want to be here anymore. And so I got to the regional trauma center just when the ambulance brought him in. He was covered in blood. He was in and out of consciousness. He had slit both wrists, stabbed himself in the torso multiple times, OD'd on several prescription medications. And he was like 70 when this happened. So I didn't think he was going to survive. And I remember looking at him before they rushed him off in surgery. And I remember waiting there for hours to find out whether he was going to make it through the surgery or not. All I could think about was my daughter at the time, my 6-year-old daughter, and wondering what would be the impact on her if she ever found out that I killed myself or that I purposely killed myself on duty. And so thank God my friend John survived that suicide attempt. But a month after that, on the anniversary of my shooting, I literally just broke down. I mean, literally just started bawling for 2 hours in my car. And finally, I got the strength and courage to pull out my cell phone and I called the on duty watch commander. And that call is what changed my life. That call is what set me on the path of recovery from post traumatic stress injury. And had I not made that phone call, I don't think I would be here today.
Yeah, well, man, I'm glad you did, man, because you are literally saving lives out here by sharing your story and giving people hope and helping them, you know, relate and you know, find a different path. You said post-traumatic stress injury. Most people are familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, and actually, until I met you and I read your book, I had never heard that terminology. Can you explain the difference a little bit?
Yeah, so PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, that's the technical term. That's the clinical term. That's what people are diagnosed with. That's what the insurance companies use for billing. Um, I advocate for using post-traumatic stress injury. And again, that one word, injury versus disorder, because
Yeah.
there's a huge difference there. And part of changing this culture, part of making it okay to not be okay, is changing that stigma. And
Yeah.
so when you hear the word disorder, you feel like, man, I've got something wrong with me. I have no control over this. I'm just stuck with it. There's nothing I can do about it. Whereas injury, that is something that happens to us as a result of being exposed to repeated trauma. And it is, I'm not a medical doctor, but it is a scientific fact that trauma, and especially repeated exposure to trauma, causes a physical change and a chemical change to the human brain. Hence the word injury. Now, most military members, most first responders, they can accept the fact if they have a knee injury, a back injury, a shoulder injury. Those things are pretty common. And we suck it up as long as we can. Eventually, we're like, look, you know what? I need to go on light duty. I need to take medicine. I'm going to try injections. Maybe I need surgery. Maybe I need physical therapy. But there's a roadmap to recovery, to getting better. You're not necessarily going to be the same as before that injury. Like, for instance, your shoulder, your knee, your back, they're not going to be the same as before the injury happened, but they can get better. Well, the same is true with post traumatic stress. You're never going to be the same person that you were before a post traumatic stress injury. But I can and also say that, you know what, before you joined the military, before you became a firefighter, a paramedic, a police officer, those things changed you. It changed
Yeah.
you as a person. Um, the job did, the exposure to trauma, all those things changed you. And so with post traumatic stress, there is a roadmap to healing, there is a roadmap to recovery. There's lots of different things that you can do to get better. There's no magic one thing that works for everybody. There's no magic one thing usually that's going to cure someone or heal someone from post traumatic stress injury. And you have to try a bunch of different things. And I did in my case, and I talk about that extensively in the book. But that's the reason why I always refer to it as post traumatic stress injury instead of disorder.
It's a great reframing because you're right. That's very powerful when you label things, and then especially when it's associated to you and something that's so intimate. So the word disorder versus the word injury is very powerful reframing. And I started to use that myself after learning it from you. So that I'm gonna continue to share that knowledge with you, that from you with everyone out there as well. Um, so when you have this warrior mindset, this warrior upbringing, and this calling, and you've lived your life by this, what does healing look like for a warrior?
Well, healing it's not linear. Like I said, there's lots of ups and downs. There's lots of good days. There's lots of bad days. There's lots of setbacks. And it's work. For me, I
Yeah,
started my recovery back in, well, the very end of December 2016. And it took me years and years before I even felt comfortable acknowledging this stuff and even talking about it. I mean, I remember just being so ashamed and so embarrassed because I thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't, I thought I was the only one. I didn't think other people were going through the same things that I went through. And really, one of the key things to my recovery was when I started going to these outside peer meetings where it was run by volunteers. It wasn't associated with any agency. It was people who, at various stages and lengths of recovery, um, had dealt with their post traumatic stress. And I remember going to these meetings, and you don't share your last name, you don't share what agency you're with. But for the first time in my life, I started hearing my brothers and sisters, fellow first responders from paramedics, firefighters, police officers that were sharing these very deep, dark personal experiences in this room, right? With literally strangers. And that's where I realized it's not just me. all these people are talking about things that I'm feeling. They're talking about things that I'm going through. They're talking about things that are affecting their relationships at home and causing issues with their marriage, causing issues with their children. And so that was the start of the journey, and now I know that there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of my brothers and sisters out there who are going through it or have gone through it or on the other side of it like I am. And so what I
Right.
tell people is that the longer you wait to get better, the longer it's going to take to get better. And so that's why I really advocate for when something really traumatic happens, hey, let's deal with it now. Like, let's jump on this, let's address it, let's be proactive. And hopefully that's going to help mitigate, the effects of that. But if you're stuffing it away and putting it away like I did for many, many years, it's going to take a long time to unpack all of those things. And again, realize that when you start bringing these things out that you've never talked about in your entire lifetime, sometimes things that even happen in childhood, and that's a whole nother thing we may talk about during this interview. But
Yeah.
a lot of military members and a lot of first responders have some form of childhood trauma. And it can be what I would call on the minor end of the scale, like maybe an emotionally distant parent or a parent that was always working all the time, or one that wasn't affectionate or expressive of their love. But it could be on the other end of the spectrum and be a parent or a relative who was an alcoholic, an addict. They could have been physically abused, sexually abused, but all these things actually, ironically enough, make us very good military members and first responders because at a young age, we learn to adapt and overcome. We become resilient.
Right.
We become natural caretakers. And then we become these big badasses wearing these uniforms and badges, right? So we're never going to go back to
Yeah.
childhood and talk about these things. But what I realized for me is that I had three layers of trauma. I had the childhood trauma, and then I had the battlefield trauma or the street trauma on top of that. And then
Yeah.
the last level was the what I call administrative betrayal,
Yeah.
institutional
Ugh.
betrayal. Some people may call it moral injury, but
Right.
like I said, you need to know that there's different layers of trauma. And if you just deal with one of them, you're not going to get better. You may get a little bit better, but you're not going to get where you want to be. And so, again, it's a process. It takes time. It takes trust. What was critical for me was finding a culturally competent clinician, a therapist
Yeah.
who only specialized in first responders, because that makes a difference. Just like military service members, first responders, we are very different than the average citizen. And we need to be dealt with differently. We need to be
Yeah.
talked to differently. It's just different. We're different. And we need therapists who truly understand that. And so for me, thank goodness, I got one who had been working with first responders for decades. And
Yeah.
I knew from our very first meeting that I could absolutely trust her with my life. And I could open up about everything and anything and not ever be looked down upon, not ever be judged, and not have to worry about it being held against me as far as my career or potential promotions or potential assignments. I knew that it was a safe space where I could open up and talk about these things. And so, again, I want warriors out there to know that this is not easy. What I'm talking about may very well be the most difficult thing that you ever do in your life. But the frank reality is that for active duty military, military veterans, and first responders, we are much more likely to die by our own hands. I'll say it again. We are much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of another during combat or on the streets or on the job. That is an absolute, undisputed fact. And think about that for a second, because whether you're in the military, whether you're a first responder, over your career, you spend hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours training to protect yourself against the obvious enemy, the combatant, the criminal on the street. But how much time do you spend training yourself for your greatest threat? And that's why I'm here today. That's why you and I are
Yeah.
talking about this.
Absolutely.
And that's why people need to know that it's worth it. Again, what I did was the most difficult thing I've ever done, but now I'm on the other side of it. and I'm living a phenomenal life, a better life than I ever have. But I also want people to know too that this takes maintenance. There's things that I
Yeah.
have to do every single day, or things that I do once or twice a month, or things I do once a week to maintain this. It's no different than physical fitness. You
Yeah.
work out at the gym, right? You got to keep that muscle tone, athleticism, your cardio up. The same thing applies to your mental health, your mental resiliency. There's things that you're going to have to do to maintain it. Because I'll tell you what, things are still going to happen. There's things that happened after that, after I medically retired, things that happened in my personal life, things that happened with my daughter being involved in a very tragic incident where she almost died, that literally set me back and brought me to my knees. But again, you have to know what are the resources, what are the tools available, and go back to that foundation of how you got out of it the first time.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think, for some folks who don't have to or haven't had to process trauma and trying to work their way back. I think that maybe in my experience, getting that first step was also a challenge to have that first conversation, to find the right person. I've been in the last 3 years, I think I've had 4 different doctors. And some of that's because of PCS, some of it's because of policy change where the provider I was seeing, I could no longer see, had been the policy said you had to use this network or whatever. But even still, each time, is this compatible? Is this person gonna be able to work with me? Am I gonna be able to trust them? Like you said, is really important. For years, I mean, I've been in for 22 years. I didn't start getting to see anybody until year 19. That's too long, you know. And I really compounded that over the years and didn't deal with it, and it took me down a few times. But um, I don't want to do the what I hear a lot of folks do, and we talked about this, Michael, previously to our conversation today. Was a lot of people get into this comparison game, or they hear, Jay Wells' story, they hear Michael's story. It's like, oh well, they've been through way more than me. I can't. I have no right to go over here. Don't do that to yourself, and you had a really strong response to me when I had brought that up, and I appreciated that. Because getting to keeping yourself healthy keeps you in the fight, but it also keeps you there for your family, like you had mentioned, for your daughter. And when you have the resilience to be available, be there for them for as long as possible in this life, it's very important to do the work and be willing and ready to do the work. Like you said, the gym reference, I love it because you got to get your reps, even for your mind and for your spirit. You got to get the reps. And I know you stay in the gym, Michael. I did have a question for you. My dogs are going off. That they're not the ones with the question. But if you could train every sergeant, every lieutenant, any leader that's out there on maybe just one thing, what would be something that you would pick out of that list?
Well, I mentioned it earlier, but that's being open, honest, vulnerable, and transparent. Um, and again, I know that's not easy to do. I know it can be very difficult for most. It was very difficult for me. It took me a long time to get here where I'm talking on a podcast for the world to hear, for the world to see. But what I challenge every leader out there is try it on a very small scale. Try it with one person. Try it at home first. Okay. Let's not forget about home, because home is the foundation. And that's what really matters. At some point, your military career is going to be over. At some point, your law enforcement career is going to be over. That rank, that title, none of that's going to matter. What's going to matter when you look back on your life is, what were your relationships with your spouse, with your children, with the other important people in your life? And I failed at this. During that time when I was struggling, I never set that healthy communication at home. I never talked about what was affecting me. I never talked about the issues that I was having. And I didn't build that trust. And so when I came home after a horrible day of seeing something horrible, I just came home pissed off and angry. and I didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't want to see anybody. And my spouse at the time was just walking around on eggshells around me because she had no idea. And how could she know? Because I didn't tell her. All she knows is that when I come through the door, I'm pissed off and I'm in a bad mood, right? So, really, the foundation to this is setting that healthy communication. And
Yeah.
again, start it at home. Start it with your spouse, your loved one, your partner. And if you have kids who are old enough, teenagers, think about starting to have those discussions with them as well. Because I'll tell you what, it may just save your kid's life. Okay. Because
Dang.
our loved ones, our children, they're going through things. And this goes back to that lead by example. And I said it earlier in a work sense, right? So in the military and law enforcement, the chief, the captain, the lieutenant, you know what? If you're setting an example, you're being open, honest, vulnerable, more likely your troops are going to come to you when they need to and do the same with you, right? Well, what do you think about your children who are at home? What do you think
Absolutely.
about when they're struggling? If they just see you as this invincible superhero, this badass who never shows emotion, never talks about feelings, never talks about the reality of the stuff that you've had to see and deal with. And I don't mean talk about it in a graphic nature, full of details, but I just mean expressing the impact of some of these things in your life that they've had on you. But be proactive about this. And once you've mastered that at home, do it at work. Try it in your office. Maybe try it at coffee with one of your subordinates. Take them out to lunch, take them out to dinner, and be open, honest, vulnerable without any expectation. And I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
you will be amazed at what conversation happens. Absolutely amazed. And I see this myself because I speak all over the world. And every time I speak, I get a line of people afterwards and people that come up to me that want to share their stories, that want to tell me things they haven't even told their own spouses before. I mean,
Oh,
think
wow.
about this.
Yeah, that's
Some
true.
stranger coming from California, they've never met. They hear me talk for 3 hours because I literally rip open and bare my entire heart and soul because they know they can trust me. They know I'm not going to judge them. They know I'm not going to look down upon them. They know I've been there and they feel that comfort and that trust and just meeting me for that 3 hours. So imagine the people in your life that have known you for years, for decades, for your entire life. Imagine the power behind that. It's a game changer. And I don't think there's anything more valuable for anyone at any level, any leader, anywhere. That's
That's powerful. That communication is one of my most important priorities, and I really resonate with your message on that response. So, hopefully, people catch that nugget right there and take it with them. Getting this opportunity to talk with you has been incredible. I just want to be respectful of your time. We're closing up to an hour. Do you still have time to talk, or do you want to put together some final words?
wait, we've said a lot here, and we've covered so many topics. And honestly, you and I, we could talk for the next 30 hours. I mean, we
Yeah,
honestly
that's true.
could. Um, I also know though that people watching and listening, their attention span is only so long. So I think what's most important is that realize that if you're in the darkness right now, if you're going through things, even though you think you're alone, even though you think nobody's going to understand it, trust me, I know that because I was there and I felt that same way. But I'm telling you right now, there's countless of your brothers, sisters out there who will fully understand it, who won't judge you, who won't look down upon you, who will wrap their arms around you and lift you up and get you the help that you need. There's endless resources out there. I mean, endless resources. I didn't know about any of them when I was on the job. And if you need help with that, you can contact me. I'm on every social media platform you could imagine. I check my messages daily. I will get back to you. Send me a message. And I will tell you another thing. This book, Relentless Courage, we talked about it. This book, guaranteed, will change your life as you know it. It has the potential to save your career, to save your relationships, but most importantly, to save your life. And if you do take the time to listen to it on Audible or read it, I personally want to hear your thoughts. So again, reach out 24/7, and I promise you I will get back to you. And the last thing, like I said, just know that there is help and there is hope. I'm living proof of it, that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how deep that hole is, it's never too late.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. I will also endorse the book myself. This book did change my life, Relentless Courage. You guys have to read it. Michael, I don't even know how many times I earmarked a page on here and wrote a personal note and transferred into my leadership journal and such. So many takeaways that I've truly been able to infuse into my battle rhythm, into my daily routine. And like you made a last, explanation point here. Most of those are for home. And so a personal thank you on that as well, for continuing to do the work that you do. These people out here are going to feel the impact. I appreciate you giving me your time, and I'd love to have you back anytime you'd like. So let's stay in touch. I wish you the best on your journeys. I know you're getting out there and talk to some folks here in 2026. And again, I'll be watching how you get after it. And thanks for collaborating.
Awesome. Thank you.